everyone. Thank you for being here, and I really appreciate being able to start with this video, especially since this video is in draft form, so it's a special treat to be able to see this in advance of everyone else. My name is John Arroyo. I'm an assistant professor of urban studies and planning at the University of California, San Diego. I'm also in our Chicanx and Latinx studies program here. And I'm really happy to have two members of the Black Studies Collaboratory with us from the University of California at Berkeley, not just because they're a sister institution, part of the UC system, which I'm a part of, but also because the grant that the Black Studies Collaboratory had through the Mellon Foundation came out of the Just Futures initiative that Mellon Foundation did in 2020. There were many applications. It was an invited program. I was the PI and the director for the University of Oregon's grant. They were 16 grantees, and I managed our Pacific Northwest Just Futures Institute for Racial and Climate Justice. Overall, Mellon gave $72 million in funding from 165 proposals to 16 grantees. Looking at universities, those that had already big Mellon grants, those that didn't have Mellon grants, to think about what an ambitious, forward-thinking, humanity-based project would look like that was centering racial inequality in bold and imaginative ways. And so for me, it's really special to be able to be here and help moderate our discussion. I'll just ask for anyone on our call, if it is possible for you to show your video, that's great. I understand there are reasons if you can't, but just to be able to create a little bit more community for ourselves. And so with us today are two members of the Black Studies Collaboratory. The first is Tianna, Dr. Tianna Paschel, co-PI and associate professor in the Department of African American Studies and Sociology at Cal. Tianna is interested in the intersection of racial ideology, politics, and globalization in Latin America. Her work can be found in the American Journal of Sociology, the Du Bois Review, Souls, a critical journal on Black politics, culture and society, ethnic and racial studies, and various edited volumes. She is also the author of Becoming Black Political Subjects, which draws on ethnographic and archival methods to explore the shift in the 1990s from ideas of unmarked universal citizenship to multicultural citizenship regimes and the recognition of specific rights for Black populations by Latin American states. It is the winner of numerous awards, including the Herbert Jacob Book Award of the Law and Society Association and the Barrington Moore Book Award of the American Sociological Association. Professor Paschel is also the co-editor, along with Petra Vera-Rideau and Jennifer Jones, of Afro-Latinos as in Movement, an interdisciplinary volume that explores transnationalism and Blackness in the Americas. She's also a Ford Fellow. I was a Ford Fellow, member of the American Political Science Association Task Force on Race and Class Inequality, and Council of Law section of the ASA, and the steering committee of the Network of Anti-Racist Action and Research. I also want to introduce Barbara Montano. Barbara Montano is the project manager of the Black Studies Collaboratory in the Department of African American Studies at the University of California at Berkeley. Since 2021, Barbara has managed the administration of the $2.8 million Mellon-funded grant under the leadership of Professor Lee Rayford and Dr. Paschel. In addition, Barbara manages a new grant initiative, the Band Scholars Project, along with other special projects and development work in the department. She understands her work to be using her organizational and relationship building skills to transform institutions and advance a more just rooted future in the politics and work of Black studies. So I want to welcome both of our guests, and I will turn it over now to Barbara.
Thank you so much, John. And we want to start by saying thank you to the Public Humanities Network of CHCI for the opportunity to speak here today. We're really excited. Thank you also to Nicholas Allen, Aaron Fay, and John Arroyo, and everybody who is part of the organization of today's event, and everyone who's staffing the event. We really appreciate it. And we're excited to be in conversation with all of you. So I'm going to start off with a version of a land acknowledgement. Usually we have a longer one, but we want to just highlight two main points today. The first is that we're calling in today from unceded Ohlone land. And also in 2023, our Department of African American Studies began a practice of giving Shumi land tax quarterly to the Indigenous women-led Sogoreate Land Trust, which is an urban land trust founded in 2012 with the goals of returning traditionally Chochenyo and Karkin lands in the San Francisco Bay Area to Indigenous stewardship and cultivating more active reciprocal relationships with the land. So we encourage everyone to do their own research about giving Shumi land tax in their area. And I'll pass it to Tianna, I think, next.
Yes, thank you so much, Barbara. And thank you, John, and thank you everyone with the network. We're really excited to be here. I echo all of the thanks that Barbara has given. Okay, so you already know who we are because of the introduction, but I also want to introduce Professor Lee Rayford, who is my co-conspirator, our co-conspirator on this amazing experiment called the Black Studies Collaboratory. And I'll talk a little more about where the origins of this came from. And spoiler alert, it's rooted in friendship and community. So a little bit, as John mentioned, this grant kind of emerges in this particular moment. So I want to say a little bit about the moment in which it emerged. And I think that shapes so much of how we did the work that we did and why we did it. So it happened amidst, of course, these historic uprisings in 2020 in the wake of the murder of George Floyd, of Breonna Taylor, and many, many others. In that moment, as you may recall, also amidst COVID, there were lots of calls to action, many of them superficial and half-hearted. But in that context, of course, foundations, including the Mellon Foundation, gave millions of dollars in the name of racial justice. This was also at a time where nearly every corporation made these often empty statements about racial justice. And so we had this sense, because we are in the Department of African American Studies, that there would be a lot of demands made in our direction as institutions, at least even on a superficial level, started to feel that they were implicated, right, in a struggle against racial injustice. And we were really skeptical about where that work might lead if it was not driven by us. And so we went to our institution and we first gave a proposal called the Abolition Democracy Initiative to kind of think about essentially doing DEI work, but from a different kind of impulse, from a different context, from a different tradition, a longer tradition of what Black Studies is, and on our own terms. And at the same time, we put in this grant proposal to the Mellon Foundation as part of their Just Futures initiative. I should also say that this also happened in the wake of the murder of Afro-Brazilian activist and politician Marielle Franco, who was assassinated in 2018 for her work against anti-Black state violence and kind of neoliberal policies more generally. And so part of what transpired in those moments was just a lot of different times where Lee and I found ourselves thinking, we have to do something, and we have to kind of do it in a way that is within our kind of tradition. So Professor Lee Rayford and I had a long relationship, friendship, and this desire to collaborate across disciplines, especially. And so in this context, we started to kind of think about it. We had been organizing these different events that involved poetry and also kind of activists talking about global Black movements, but especially Black feminist movements. And so we started to kind of think about what that could look like. And so we sketched up all these ideas about a global Black feminist institute and something that would be about arts, archives, and activism. And then a couple of years later, this initiative was born. We knew that we wanted to do this work not within a DEI framework, but rather in a liberatory framework. And so we dug our heels into the history of our own department, which is a department where June Jordan launched her beautiful Poetry for the People program. It's a department that has a long history of visiting scholars and elders, just being there with us on the 6th floor, where we're located, and where there's just a culture of community members being a part of the version of Black Studies that we've been doing, not as outside members, but just part of it. So we seize this particular moment of what I like to call faux wokeness, to dream up our own freedom projects based on our own legacy as a department and as a field, and to kind of think about what can be made possible within the kind of boundaries of the university, kind of like kind of technically in the boundaries of the university, but conceptually and in terms of practice, more expansive. So we had about 2 weeks to write this $2.8 million grant from the Mellon Foundation, and we honestly did not think there was any universe where we would get this money, and so we said Black as many times, freedom as many times, anti-Black violence as many times as we wanted, in part because we wanted to dream together. So what came together was the Black Studies Collaboratory, which aims to lift up the world building work of Black studies and Black study in the world. So we bring together activists, artists, scholars, and other local community members to amplify this interdisciplinary political and world building field that we're in. Um, and we knew that part of what we wanted to do was to kind of think about decentering the university proper and to think about the ways that Black study can happen um, everywhere and have happened everywhere, from the kitchen table to the seminar room, from the street corner to the concert stage, from the prison cell to the lecture podium. So part of what we wanted to do was dream up a radical different future with all of these different kinds of folks who are engaged in different versions of Black liberation struggles and different versions of Black studies. Okay. So some of the values that are at the center of this work is that the first, which I just mentioned, is just the idea that Black study happens everywhere. We have community archivists, we have community scholars, like memory makers and history keepers in our communities. Have artists, dancers, people who are doing all kinds of Black study work, not within the proper confines of the ivory tower. And we wanted this project to recognize that work, but also we wanted to learn from those folks. Second, and relatedly, that the university, of course, is not the center of Black study, but it can be a strategic site, right? And so we knew that that would be important. And along with that, Black feminists have taught us a lot about how to do this kind of work, including how to bring an ethics of care into the work. And so for us, that means that we're going to be thinking about how we make space. We're going to be thinking about labor, compensated and uncompensated. We're going to be thinking about how we relate to each other as part of our praxis, right? So you'll talk more about that, Barbara, later, but that was also important. Some of our goals were, first and foremost, to support this work, the world building work of Black studies. So we engaged in a lot of dreaming and at different stages, at different levels, a lot of experimentation, and to foster intergenerational, multi-sided, multidisciplinary community, to curate spaces that foster collaboration and experimentation, and to support Black life-affirming work on and off campus, and often in between those two. So I won't go into detail here, but we have 6 programs within the Spain, the Abolition Democracy Fellows Program, which is a year-long kind of institute with these different kinds of folks in it. We broke bread together. We met once a week and we did public programming. Each fellow dreamt up their dream kind of event, which was part of our Black Studies Open University. We had a Global Black Feminism Summer Lab with graduate students and early career faculty, a community partners program, a small grants program, and of course, you've heard about the Black Futures Retreat. So I'd like to highlight 3 examples, though, of how the BSC, which is the Collaboratory, the BSC, kind of has done work, I think, foundationally to provide the space, resources, and kind of I don't know, maybe even audacity to engage in a kind of dream work, right? For folks to actually do more dreaming, do more risk taking, and to do projects that may have otherwise been inconceivable, right? Or unreachable, right? To experiment and collaborate in new ways. So I'll just highlight 3 of those programs quickly, and then I'll hand it over to Barbara. So the first one is the Black Healing Portal, or the Portal Negro de Sanación, which was done by our artists in residence, Las Crudas Cubensi, who use this opportunity to kind of think about their performance art, but also to kind of think about the ways that they might create in a particular moment where there's this kind of fetishizing of Black trans violence against Black trans people, to think about another mode of engagement with Black trans experiences, to think about healing as opposed to death, and to basically open up a portal to another world of what might be, right? So it included poetry, it included all kinds of technology to kind of like transport us to this other world. There were Black trans artists who were there with us through videos that they had created and curated, art that they had done for the portal. There was a big original kind of visual art that was created for this, as well as curating like music and DJ experiences. We also have the Mo Betta School, which was our elder in residence, the amazing Miss Daphne Muse, who is a community archivist, educator, curator, children's book author and editor, and activist. She was paired with, and all of our fellows were paired with undergraduate research assistants. And so those relationships were some of the sweetest relationships that got developed across generations. And they decided to further this work through a small grant, where they basically did a variety of things. But one of the things that they wanted to do was to kind of formalize this intergenerational conversation, to kind of think about how we might get free through actually talking to each other across age. And so I'll say, so they call this the old school plus the new school equals the Mo Betta School, and involved formally setting up a bookstore, and also, in their words, quote, creating space for intergenerational dialogue. They seek to bring ideas from multiple times and spaces into generative reimagination. And the tools for our liberation are already at our community's disposal. We need only realize and implement them. And then finally, we have the Black Chicagoland Is exhibit that also grew out of a small grant. April Graham Jackson and Roderick Jackson are graduate students in geography and African American studies here respectively, but they were often they're also artists, right? Photographers, music curators, and a journalist, and they were often doing their work in silos. So their artistic work was here, and then their actual research was here. So this grant was able to get them to kind of deepen their work. And so they basically, along with Lee Rayford's vision and collaboration, with the Writer Museum on campus, we're able to do this beautiful exhibit called Black Chicagoland, which brings together richly textured photography, music, and Black Chicagoland, and inner musings of Black Chicagoans to thicken how we understand Black Chicago-ness within and beyond the city's iconic South Side of Chicago. And it's really beautiful. There's a lot of kind of remapping and reimagining. And I'd like to also say, and a lot of archiving of Black life, which is also a pretty central thread in our work with the BSC. I'll stop there.
Great, thank you, Tianna. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about how we make all the beautiful, incredible programming that Tianna just talked about happen, and in particular in the context that we're in and the university that we're in. So briefly, as you all know now, we are at UC Berkeley, and I'm sure everyone knows that Berkeley is a large public research institution, which inevitably means it's a large bureaucracy, and a decentralized bureaucracy where it's often difficult to get things done, and many processes and procedures are complicated, as I'm sure we all experienced in our own roles. And in particular, it's complicated to do some of the things that we wanted to do, some of the programming we wanted to do through this grant, in part because of the nature of the university, but also in part because the university was not built around the values that Tianna talked about, that are the values of the BSc. We know that Black Studies was founded in struggle against the university at this institution and many others. And so one of my biggest roles over the course of the past 3 years was to figure out how do we implement our programming in such a way that reflects our political commitments and reflects our ethics of care that Tianna talked about. So next slide, please. Oh, and I'll just thank you. I'll just briefly say that that picture was our community of the 6th floor, some of our staff and faculty from the department. So that's where we are, small but mighty Department of African American Studies. And so what we ended up discovering that we were doing as we went through the course of the grant and as we talked with our program participants was that we were creating the conditions of care for people to do their best work in Black studies, for people to dream, for people to take space for themselves, for people to have the resources that they needed to, again, do projects that may have never been supported before. And so that was, really essential to our work. And we also got a lot of people saying like, hey, we want in on this and we want to partner on this. And will you put your name on what we're doing over here? And so we started to think about what are the criteria by which we do our work that we would evaluate kind of other partnerships and collaborations. So these are some of kind of like a summary of some of the ideas that we came up with around that. And they may be very intuitive, but I think they're important to talk about out loud. So the first one is we work collaboratively, right? We work together, that's in our name. But what that means is we communicate with each other and we work as a team, and we're not here to build up an individual or one idea, one person. We're here to do this work together. And sometimes that takes a little bit more time. But we have seen time and again how important it is to do that work. Because when we attend to everyone's ideas and everyone's contributions, we create something that attends to everyone's needs. And that is, more effective programming that really reflects our values. We also care about each other, which again may seem simple, but is really important. So we care about each other as whole people. We start every meeting by checking in with each other and seeing how we're doing and paying attention to those responses. We also think about our boundaries and our limits and how we respect those limits and those boundaries as much as we can so that we can, make this work sustainable. Something we're still working on figuring out, but we attend to that as much as we can. We also listen to the needs of everyone in our community, and we work to meet those needs. That has become important, especially around accessibility and making sure that everyone is able to fully participate in our programming. And again, in a way that attends to their needs. That may be different from the policies of the university, or, the university may be able to say, we can check a box and we can stop here and we'll have, addressed, or we'll have made good on this policy. But we understand that, no, that doesn't always meet everybody's needs. So going deeper on that accessibility route in particular. We also slow down. So we resist the pace of capitalism and of the neoliberal university as much as we can. That is hard to do, and sometimes we have done too much, right? But as much as we can, We slow down, we design our programming so that there is time to fully dedicate to each program. We also ended up building in leadership retreats over the course of the grant so that our leadership team could really sit down and think about, have space to think about our long-term vision. And sometimes we say no. Sometimes we say, hey, we took on too much and we're going to let that thing go, or we're going to scale it down, or we're going to ask that person to take the project somewhere else, and that's okay. So we slow down as much as we can, and as Tianna talked about, we find joy as much as we can. We create space for music, for dance. The image on the slide is a picture of folks dancing at our Black Futures retreat. We had a dance party almost every night of the retreat. We had yoga sessions. We had folks just doing jam sessions together around the fireplace, because we understand that to be part of the work, and that to be part of creating a space where people can show up as their whole selves. I'll go to the next slide, please. Thank you. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the strategies that I use as an administrator at Berkeley. What I just talked about was kind of how we interact as a team, also how our department, the values of that, the ethics of work in our department, how we interact with our program participants, et cetera. But again, thinking about being in a large bureaucracy, okay, how do we do these things, and how do we allow ourselves the time and the resources to do what we want to do? So the first thing that I talk about a lot is our work is about relationships. So that means the BSc has never been transactional. And again, it's never been about building one person or thing up and getting things done. It's always been about building relationships and building connections. So for me personally, what that has meant is to really care and get to know all the people that I work with on campus and all of our external partners, and to create a connection with them. It also means showing up for them and viewing every relationship as a reciprocal kind of mutual interaction. We're also not here just to get ours, right? Or just to get something, just to take from someone else to benefit our programming. We are always thinking about how can we also make this collaboration mutually beneficial. So Black Chicagoland is that Tianna talked about was a great example, a wonderful collaboration with our practice department. And through that partnership, we have just come back together again and again to do different projects together that have benefited both our programs. So that's something we always think about, is how are we also collaborating with our partners? How are we showing up for them? And I think that in a large bureaucracy, relationships are really how we get things done. Having that colleague you can call and say, hey, how did you do this complicated procedure? Or do you know someone I can talk to, et cetera, et cetera. So that's a really important piece of it. The other important piece is deeply understanding the context that we're in, to understand how we can change it. So one of my biggest roles when I started on was figuring out what are the policies and procedures and rules that govern this grant at Berkeley? How do I get things done? How do I hire people? How do I give people money? And I realized that once I understood those processes really well, as they are, currently, I could begin to kind of push the boundaries of them a little bit and think about, okay, now I know how to set up a purchase order. I've done that 10 times. Maybe I could apply this purchase order idea to our community partner program as a way to funnel resources to our community partners. And this is all through learning, again, from relationships on campus, but, deeply understanding the rules that kind of govern us also help us understand how can I think creatively about those rules? How can I use university resources differently? How can I innovate and think about, or ask for exceptional approval, right? What are the ways that I can push the boundaries? I think all of those things may be small, but ultimately they add up to doing the work that we want to do, which is redistributing resources, and funneling out the money of this grant, essentially. The last thing I have on here comes from a colleague and a mentor, Brianna George. We were talking about this subject one time, and she said to me, Barbara, administrators at Berkeley have to be wildly creative to get things done, essentially. And I'm sure all of us have experienced that in our different institutions. And the way that I think about that is moving from a place of possibility. You know, often we may have an idea for our program and we look up the policy and it seems too complicated and we just say, no, we can't do that. Let's think about something else, right? But I try to work from a perspective of possibility. Okay, let me learn more. What else could I do? Who else could I ask? What other resources might I use? And I also like to think about it as getting as close to the dream or the final vision as possible. Sometimes the university does come in and say, no, you really can't do that, right? And that's okay, but how close can I get to that point? So ultimately, again, we want our, how we work and how our programs run to reflect those values of the BSc. And yeah, this final slide, just say briefly a couple examples of, again, of how this has kind of transformed the institution, which is the work that I think we ultimately do. So one way we understood we could redistribute resources to our community was to ask the foundation and philanthropy team here at Berkeley to present essentially on development work and grant making to our communities, including our fellows. And so one of our fellows, Rashad Timmons, is pictured there with the family of Michael Brown Jr., attended the session and learned about a grant and worked with the family of Michael Brown Jr. and the Chosen for Change Foundation to submit a proposal to the Borealis Philanthropy, which they have just recently won that award. They won a $150,000 grant from Borealis Philanthropy. And Rashad has a long history of working with the Brown family that I wish I could talk more about. But for time, I'll just say that, we saw that as one example where we could reach beyond the university, where we could reach the folks that we see actually doing Black Studies work in the world and share some resources to support their programming. And then I'll just also briefly mention again about our community partners who are local Bay Area organizations doing Black liberation work, Black radical world building work. Sort of the example there is, again, using a business process of the purchase order. I won't go into the details, but kind of reinventing a business process at Berkeley to do what we wanted to do, which was get resources to our community partners and build a relationship of trust and support and recognition with our community partners. This is a picture from our first community partners meeting. And we have now worked with those folks for, I guess, like a year and a half, and we're continuing to work with them. So anyway, please stay in touch with our program. We're happy to answer any questions. The best way to stay in touch is to sign up for our newsletter, and I'll drop that link in the chat as well. Check out our website for prior programs, and feel free to reach out to either of us, to be in touch. Do you want to add anything, Tianna? Or
No, I was just saying thank you, Barbara. You're amazing.
Thank you. Thank you.
Again, it's such a treat to hear so much more about the BSc and learn about it firsthand. And as I laughed when you said we had 2 weeks to write this, because I remember that pressure when we were working on ours, and there were so many things that we needed to coordinate that we were like, we'll figure it out later, and we didn't know what that would look like on the review side.
Yep.
At this moment, I want to open it up to the audience for any general questions and discussion, ideas, inspiration. And so I see James has his hand up.
Sure, thank you. And thank you for the presenters. My name is James. I just came on board as the interim chair of the African American Studies Department at Syracuse University. One of the things that drew me to this is because I also have an arts background. I'm an artist myself and coordinator of arts education programs on campus as well. But I just have a general question for clarity sake. I'm looking at your website, the website that has that sort of star shape with the Black Studies Collaboratory at UC Berkeley in the middle of it. And at the top of it, I see, that, listing of advising and undergraduate courses and divisions and so on and so forth. And then, and also in the label the label African American Studies, African Diaspora Studies. So my question is, maybe I just missed this. I wasn't sure if the Black Studies Collaboratory is a center within those departments. Is it a rebranding or relabeling or renaming of those departments? Is it? I'm just not sure if since this grant came about 3 years, 2021 or so. Was it? How does it relate to, or how is it embedded in these previous programs at UC Berkeley? If someone could just clarify that. I just wanted to get a better understanding.
Yeah, thank you so much, Professor Rawlings. Rawling, we were really clear about this in the beginning because we knew that this was a moment. It was also a moment of austerity on our campus and throughout the country. And so we knew that organized research units, which is what we call kind of centers on campus, were being squeezed and were dying off and being deprived of basic oxygen, like in terms of like the university not funding them and it just being this kind of rat race to try to fund them. So we knew that was happening. We also know that Black Studies is always kind of to one degree or another not at the center of like the resource like gravy train that happens in universities. And so we actually knowing that and also respecting the kind of iterative nature of this, like that we would only know what we want to do next then once we have like this community that includes artists and activists in front of us, what we might do next. We resisted any kind of like institutionalizing this as some separate institute, but rather we thought about this grant collectively as the Department of African American Studies grant, not Lee Rayford's grant, not Tianna Paschel's grant, not Barbara Montano's grant, but the Department of African American Studies, because we knew that when the funders fatigued of racial justice, that we would still be here. And so we thought that we had to kind of do something that would strengthen the department and bring attention to the department. So it's a program within the Department of African American Studies and a long legacy of things that we used to do without money that we did with a whole bunch of money for 3 years. And we will continue to do, hopefully with still some money. I think that's the best way to put it. Does that answer?
So those departments still exist,
Yep.
and this is just an entity within that nexus.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Other questions our audience might have? I've got one, and it feels pretty self-explanatory, but I didn't want to assume, and I wanted to give you both an opportunity to comment on it. The decision between what it might have been years ago, the Black Studies Collaborative versus Collaboratory, using the word collaboratory in title, and sort of the story behind that and what that might mean to you in the work.
Yeah, I mean, obviously laboratory is in there and there's a lot of labs going around. I mean, it's so funny because we thought we were just being like interesting and innovative in our own. I mean, I felt like we were just like in a cave, Lee and I, being like, and then going back to the department being like, what do you guys think? And they're being like, it sounds like us, sounds amazing. And then going back into our cave. So what's funny is that when we came up for air and out and like, for sunlight, we realized like everybody was doing like lab this, lab that. And I think for us, like that collaboratory got at the experimental aspect of this. Like we did not, I mean, Barbara can talk more about it, but when we gave money, we gave people money with a kind of trust and respect for what they already do. And kind of like with an ethics of care in general, like this world is hard. It's hard out here being Black in America, certainly. And also under the conditions and COVID and everything else. And like anyone who's doing community work on any level, like especially like give them money for what they want to do, but don't be punitive in terms of policing exactly how that money is used, and making it so that they have to do so many things in terms of reporting, in terms of deliverables back to us. And so there is an ethics of kind of experimentality in this, or like experimenting, but also kind of the space to experiment too. Like, right, like no one is going to say, like, if you pivoted in a project for our small grants program, that was okay. And some of the pivots became the thing, you know? And so I think that gets at that. I don't know if Barbara, you want to say anything about the experiments. You were there, you were in there.
Yeah, well, I was you know, I was hired after the name was already decided. So it's actually kind of cool to hear that. To hear I didn't know all of that, Tianna. I think, yeah, for me, it feels almost like there's more moving parts in that word, I guess, or there is more movement and experimentation as Tianna talked about. And I think that it is a program that is always growing, and that now there are so many kind of offshoots of the BSc. And what's really interesting is I saw one of our students who had been a small grantee the other day, and he was like, oh yeah, I saw someone else at somewhere, like not even on campus or something. And we both mentioned we were in the BSc somehow. And there was just an immediate kind of connection between us, and a kind of like association about the feelings of the BSc that we've just talked about. And it was really kind of beautiful to hear that. And so I think that, yeah, it kind of shows that it's not kind of contained, and it's always moving. And it's, you know, I think one of the also beautiful things that Lee and Tianna kind of thought about was that, you know, that the work could go on its own, right? So that even if, you know, the grant is over, the money is over, et cetera, the work is going to continue. And that's what we've seen.
Any other questions from our audience members? Amy, I see your hand is raised.
Yep, thank you. I mean, this whole project is just kind of amazing to see. I think the video, I know it's form, but it's just a beautiful video. I'm interested in the retreat. I'm kind of curious how much of that happened organically. Like, you have families there, like, do people know to bring their instruments because there's going to be a jam session? I'm just curious, like, how that comes about, like how much is programmed and how much just happens on its own.
Yeah, Barbara, you want to take that one?
Yeah, sure. I can. You know, I would say it was a mix. So we spent a lot of time, again, collaborating on a very intentional program that included some conversations. So it was sort of designed to be a culmination of the grant. So we had some of our program participants come up on stage and talk about their experience in the BSc and what it has meant to them. So some points of deep study. And then, as I said, we also had some scheduled programming around dancing, going into Yosemite. And so, but we also wanted to strike a balance to allow a lot of downtime and people to do their own thing. We did, and we had childcare at the retreat, which was really beautiful. And so we were very insistent upon being able to have childcare, as, you know, again, part of our Black feminist ethics of care, and thinking about how people can fully participate in programming and the resources we need to do that. And so, yeah, we kind of let people know before the retreat, this is what we hope that this retreat will be. So we hope that there will be jam sessions. We hope it wasn't prescriptive, but yeah, like, bring your instruments. And I think it, you know, all the participants had been in our programming before. So it was also like, bring yourself, right? And that will create the program that we want to see. So I'd say it was a mix. There was a clear program, but also space for, again, experimentation. And some of the most beautiful parts of the retreat were just seeing people connect who maybe had never met each other in the BSc again, you know, but like engaged in deep conversation, creating a song together, you know, doing some kind of deep study together. So there was also room for that.
And maybe as our last question, I see Dr. Rawling has posted a really great question here. What's the best conference out there for me to attend where I can find other departmental leaders in African American studies like yourselves with an eye towards creative and collaborative programs and projects? And this was open for everyone else too after
Yeah, I was gonna say I might
Tianna and
lead
Barbara.
on. Yeah, thank you for that question. I mean, I think this kind of work is being done everywhere, honestly. I think that the mandate of Black studies, I mean, always uncomfortably within the institution, but I think our history as a field is so deeply, you know, rooted in struggle, as Barbara put it, um, that you see these kind of easier relationships between community and Black studies than you do in other fields sometimes, right? And so I think, you know, when I think about my colleagues who go just to the major Black studies conferences, I'm like, they are doing this kind of work. I mean, what you bring up is like, maybe we need to get together, actually, who are oriented in this direction to kind of like more in a concerted way talk about it. But I would say like, you know, National Conference of Black Studies, ASALH, OSWAD, like all of those places, we're there. And I would say, you know, there are a lot of Black women and Black feminists leading the charge in a lot of these places. So some of those places, I think about like the National Women's Studies Association, which over time, you know, Black feminists have been so central to it. A lot of the scholars who I know are doing all this amazing work go there. That's the conference that they do every year. And I think on the humanistic side too, of course, American Studies, but I say we're everywhere, but I think maybe we need to curate some more spaces for like-minded folks to talk about this more. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah, and definitely just quickly feel free to reach out, you know, and talk more with us.
That was actually a really great way to conclude our program today, because one of the goals of the Public Humanities Network within the Consortium of Humanities Centers and Institutes is to bring people together to experiment, to think of new ideas, and to really support people who are taking the charge at their universities, centers, institutes. And we know many times those are 2 to 3 year kind of appointments, and they shift and change. And so people are coming in at different levels, having done that before, having done that, newly doing that. And what it's like to do this work now feels so different than many other times. And so I think the best thing we can do is provide these platforms for sharing projects we see that seem like really great signature projects and help other people see that, and hope that the best thing we could hear is that later people connected and got the advice, input, lessons, history, inspiration they needed to go on and do the similar kind of work at their places. I want to thank Barbara Montano, Dr. Tianna Paschel, and also Dr. Lee Rayford, and everyone at the Black Studies Collaborative at Cal. And I say that not just as faculty, I say that the amazing staff. I know through the Oregon program, we could not have done this without all of the problem solvers trying to pay community grants and these types of things. We were doing regranting, and it was like, sometimes it felt so hard being like, it's just a check for work. And they were like, but it's not in this category. And we're like, we have to figure it out. And so they're lasting sort of lessons for institutions there too, even after the Mellon funding money runs out. So yeah, staff, faculty, students, community members, elders, youth, musicians, artists in every way, and just everyone. That's what made this project so beautiful and unique. I've been following it for a few years now. And just thank you for taking time out of your busy schedules to share this with us. So thank you, everybody. And I encourage everyone to follow the BSc and department newsletter, to follow the website, and to stay tuned for the final video and other outcomes from the BSc as it continues its work.
Thank you so much. Shout out to our colleague, David, who's here, who brought his children, and it was just really beautiful. Yeah, the Black Futures Retreat. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank
Thank you.
you.
Thanks, everyone.